I'm going to go ahead and get started. I see more attendees joining us. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in today's Event Insider session. I'll take this moment to reintroduce myself to our new members here. My name is Chelsea, and I will be your host and moderator for today's panel. So before we officially begin the discussion, I'd like to take a moment to share some announcements with you all, as well as read out the results from the poll. So the recording of today's session will be available on the Whova YouTube channel for you to see within the next few days. So our YouTube channel has a recording of all of our past Event Insider sessions, along with other content about the platform. So definitely subscribe to the Whova channel to receive notifications of our latest videos. Additionally, we've opened up 3 poll questions prior to today's session. If you weren't able to get to that, that's no problem. But I would like to just read aloud some of the submitted responses that we got. So the first question that we asked was, what do you want to get the most from today's session? So some of our top answers included understanding the data from events, understanding more about the app, the best ways to use Whova data post-event, and how to get the most out of Whova. Those are all some wonderful responses, so thank you to those for sharing. I also see some responses to our second question, which is how do you measure the success of your events? It looks like the most common answer to this poll question was attendee feedback, followed by session attendance. So wonderful. And then the last question is, what is your primary goal when using event data? So taking a look at our responses here, it looks like everybody responded with improving future events, followed by improving attendee experience and driving attendee engagement. That's all very informative. So thank you to everybody who has filled out those polls for us here. That is all of the questions that we asked, but it's great to see these responses as we will be covering some of these topics with our guest speakers. All right, and then my final announcement today before today's discussion officially starts is that we will be reserving the last 10 minutes of the session for live audience questions. So if at any moment you have a question that you would like our guest panelists to answer, please drop them in the Q&A tab. And once we end our discussion with the panelists, I will begin the live Q&A segment and read through those questions. All right. So after that introduction, it is officially time to introduce our guest speakers for today. So firstly, we have Jimmy Lee, who is the Event Program Manager for the IEEE Communications Society. So Jimmy, it's great to have you here. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hi, thanks Chelsea, and thank you to Whova for inviting me to join this Event Insider webinar series. And it's fun to see the responses to the poll, because I think if I were attending this webinar, I think those are the kind of things that I would like to learn about as well. So again, thank you to Whova for inviting me to join this webinar. So as Chelsea mentioned, my name is Jimmy Lee, Event Program Manager for the IEEE Communications Society. I've been with IEEE for 8 years now, but I've been a planner for 20-something years, so it's a long time. Primarily with association. But I think what I like about program planning is it's just so dynamic, so fast paced. You get to meet so many different people. Not every day is the same. Just a lot of a lot of things going on at the same time, which makes it fun and also stressful. But again, it's you're doing something 20-something years already. You kind of get used to it. But anyways, but thanks again for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jimmy. And then next, I would like to introduce our second panelist. So next will be Max Malmud, who is the Operations and PAC Rim Conference Coordinator for the Center on Disability Studies at the University of Hawaii. So Max, we're happy to have you here today. Can you also please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So thank you. My name is Max Malmud. I am the PAC Rim Conference Coordinator. So that's the short version of the Pacific Rim International Conference on Disability and Diversity Studies. So that's our annual conference that we host here in Hawaii, centered around the Pacific Rim region, with our 2025 conference coming up in about 2 months. So it's been a bit hectic, but Huva has been our main conference app for the past 3 years and has really opened up all of our speakers to more digital platforms. We've been able to also include virtual attendees. So Huva has been a pretty pivotal part of our conference planning for a while. And my background is in education as well as in event planning. So I've held my current position as event coordinator for about 2.5 years, almost 3 years now. And it's been a combined educational passion with event planning passion of mine.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Max. Um, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from both of you about event data. And I want to just start by learning more about your events before we dive into today's topic. I know we already touched on it a little bit, but if you wouldn't mind, could you please share a little bit more about the events that you have run recently, such as how many days they've lasted, how many people attended, the number of speakers and sponsors and exhibitors, and so on. So Jimmy, I'll start with you first. Could you please share a little bit about your most recent events?
Uh, yes, Chelsea. So in my current capacity with the IEEE ComSoc, I oversee 7 events. The largest one took place last December in Cape Town, and that's the Global Communication Conference, or GLOCOM for short. So that conference, we about like close to 700 people attended, representing almost 70 countries. It's a 5-day conference. There were 6 keynote speaker, 20 concurrent sessions, 3 executive forum, and I don't know, 32 tutorial, 10 sponsor, exhibitor, just a lot of things going on. But overall, it's a very successful event. But that was the last one that I had the pleasure of working on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing more about that. And then Max, the same question. Can you also please share a little bit more about your most recent events?
Of course. So I'm a little bit lucky. I only get to dedicate myself to this one event once per year, is this annual conference. But it is also about a week-long conference with 2 main days. And then we have pre-conference events as well as post-conference events throughout that week. This year, we're aiming for 700 people roughly to attend. We have 3 keynote speakers across the 2 main days of our event, but we also have topic strand leading speakers, and those can be up to 300 speakers for 2 main days of our conference. In addition to roughly 15 exhibitors, and of course, we plan to have 5 to 10 sponsors as well for our event.
Wow, thank you. It's great to have an idea of the types of events that both of you run. And then since today's topic is on event data, next I wanted to discuss how people often use event data to mean different things. So I wanted to ask, how would you define event data? And can you provide some examples? So Max, I'll turn back to you first for this question. What do you think?
So event data in a broad sense is just anything and all data that contributes to the continuous development of our event and all future events and all the insights and everything that we pull in order to then implement for our next year to make the conference even better. And that's all shaped by the data we receive. It's all shaped by the feedback we receive. So for example, based on data from one of our prior conferences, we had a strand chair or one of our topic leads speak to the importance of having an Indigenous focused strand. So this year we were able to represent that with many Indigenous speakers that are going to come to attend and both speak at our conference. And as we focus on disability studies, we also have more practical needs, such as what kinds of data and feedback relate to accessibility, and making sure that we're also improving on those resources over time.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. That sounds very impactful. And then I also wanted to ask Jimmy the same question as how would you define event data, and if you could provide any examples.
Yeah, so I mean, I echo what Max said. I mean, event data is essentially just information that you want to gather so that you have a better sense of how each of your programs or events is, it is performing. And I know Max focused on the kind of the program development side and using data to formulate the program content and such. But you can use event data as well for, prepping your budget or planning the logistics as well. And so that's what I'm kind of keen on. I like to know, how many people show up for lunch and the dinner and the coffee breaks and so on, how many people pick up the bags and things like that, so that, for future year, you don't over order food or you don't under order the number of bags that are available for the attendee. But all of that, although it sounds kind of trivial, but all of that can help you out greatly in the long term in terms of planning your budget accordingly.
Definitely. Yes, thank you for sharing those ideas as well. It's very helpful to get a better understanding of how we can define event data before we continue speaking more about it. But to build off of that, so in your experiences, what type of event data do you find to be the most valuable to you? So Jimmy, I'll go back to you this time. What do you find to be the most valuable?
Well, so first of all event data is important, right? All event data is valuable. So otherwise, you shouldn't spend time gathering the information. Yeah. But for me, as I mentioned before, I like to focus on the bottom line ultimately. So if I can use the information that I gather to help me, again, like to order enough bags, run, not order too many, and just start kind of wasting money like that. I like to be able to do that, and I think that's where information about how many people pick up their bag and so on can go a long way in terms of allowing me to better plan the conference budget. So for me, I think any data that I can use to help me again prepare a budget that's most efficient and most kind of meet the need for the conference. I think that's what I'm keen on.
Definitely. Great. Thank you for sharing that. And then Max, I want to ask you the same thing. What type of data do you find to be the most valuable in your experience?
Yes, certainly everything that's been said so far, I echo. I feel like that'll be my answer for coming after Jimmy for a lot of these questions. But to expand a little bit, for us, we really also focus on the demographics of our attendees. We really try to make it an objective to serve the community that we are catering to via our conference. So to know how those demographics are shaped and changed, especially as something that's open to a global participant, is very helpful in terms of informing how we then cater it to their own needs and objectives. But even with this more digital move to digital programming, having more digital materials, using Whova, being more integrated digitally, we use also action-based data tracking. So simply how many clicks are we getting on this page versus this page? How many clicks are we getting at this session? I feel like that's a very, as Jimmy said, like a bottom line way of tracking engagement as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective as well. That's very interesting to hear. And then now to transition a little bit into where event logistics come into play, because we know how much goes into planning for an event ahead of time. So firstly, how does event data play a role in planning event logistics, such as event venue, room allocation, staffing, etc.? So Max, I'll go back to you. Would you care to share?
Yeah, of course. So the short answer is that it directly influences the logistics and how it plays out in many ways, in pretty much every way. So I would say that we come out of the data first, the data being kind of the ground level, in order to know what we're serving by putting this conference on. So that could mean expanding spaces in anticipation of more engagement in a certain topic, adjusting the staff, as you mentioned, to have availability spread out throughout what is a very large scale conference with many event options, and because there are so many different options throughout the day and throughout the planning and programming of our conference, just ensuring that we have all those resources and all those setups prepared much more ahead of time so that they can all run congruently together.
Yes, absolutely. Of course. Thank you for sharing that. And then Jimmy, same thing. What role would you say event data plays in planning event logistics?
Yeah, it's a huge role. The last thing you want is have two prominent speaker and you have an empty room. That's the last thing you want to happen. I'm sure we can all attest to that. And that's where event data come in, right? If you know that there's let's say there's like all 20 concurrent session going on, then you may not want to schedule a prominent session competing with those sessions, right? And that's almost common sense. Because again, I mean, you have some people going to a different session. You just don't want an empty room when there's two prominent speaker in that space. So I think event data plays an important role, but at the same time, the content, the speaker, all of that will help drive how you go about scheduling your session, when, where, the space, so on. But at the end of the day, you want to have that information that can help you plan accordingly.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that answer. So interesting to hear how impactful data can be for planning all the different aspects that go into an event.
Right.
But next, I'm going to direct this next question back to Jimmy, because we know you've organized international events with attendees from all around the world. So how do you use attendee data to determine where you host your conferences each year?
Yeah. So a couple of my conferences have a like a set rotation every 3 years. So again, using that one example I presented earlier, the GlowCon conference that was in Cape Town back in December. So that was the EMEA rotation. And then next year, well, this year I should say, they go into Asia Pacific in Taipei. So if I know a conference is going to be in a certain country, and I know that the audience, where they're coming from, for example, then I can anticipate that this coming year there could be an increase in attendance, and therefore I should obviously need to plan the budget accordingly. I need to make sure that my room block can accommodate the influx of attendance. I want to make sure that I order enough bags, for example. And of course, if a conference is going to be in, let's say, the U.S., Canada right now, and typically we get a lot of people from Asia Pacific attending that conference, then we could anticipate maybe not many of them can attend for various reasons. And if that's the case, then to Max's point, we could look into some kind of virtual element for them to participate in the conference. So I think again, understanding your audience, where they come from, what they're looking for, and then if the conference is in a certain place, then you can anticipate whether they will attend or not.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. Did you have anything you wanted to add on as well, Max?
No, I echo everything that Jimmy said. If anything, I would just say that, yeah, especially because we both are involved in planning events that are appealing to global demographics, that data can really heavily inform as well as encourage that virtual element and assess just travel needs and accessibility in that way.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing as well. And then on to our next question, which is more specifically, how do you track attendee check-in and session attendance? And then how does this type of data benefit you? So Max, we'll start with you for this one. What do you think?
So that's one of the key features that we use, is just the ability to see how our attendees check into sessions and just also planning their agenda. We noticed that a lot of our attendees love using that pre-agenda setup where you can select which sessions you're going to go to and really plan out your conference event and procedure. That also allows them to simply map out travel throughout our conference if they need to. But we like to see who added which sessions are becoming more popular or more engaged per year. Maybe there's heavy focus on a certain topic when maybe there's this exponential focus on another topic, meaning maybe we want to expand on that event or the sessions underneath that topic umbrella for the future years for our attendees. We also like that there's even like a like feature to an extent. There's like a I like the session feature, and it's just a good way again to have like a more actionable form of data to track where we can physically see that somebody has clicked and engaged with that session. And we also really enjoy, or our presenters rather really enjoy that Q&A feature because it's something that allows them to, one, interact with the audience that is there in person in real time, but also have that combined with our virtual attendees so that they can feel as if they are right there in the session, which they are, with our speakers as well. And that all contributes to the overall assessment of how we move forward.
Absolutely. That's a great point as well. And I just also wanted to ask adding on to that, do you also keep track of attendance throughout the day? So for example, when your busiest times are, and are there benefits to that information?
Yes, of course. So I'm sure Jimmy would agree, but as coordinators, we are often the ones running around sometimes throughout the conferences, but it's certainly something that both me and my conference team who helps me plan the conference will check throughout the day just to see where we're engaging more. Something that occurred for this year is actually we noticed that there was a heavy increase in our afternoon sessions comparative to our early evening sessions. So we decided to move more of our lecture-based content up until the afternoon and the morning to have more interactive engagement content and event sessions in the early evening. And we're hopeful that the data for the coming year will show that people are more engaged, they stay longer at the conference to engage with those topics, and that flow just is a smoother one for our attendees.
Absolutely. That's so interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And then Jimmy, I'll ask you the same question. First, how do you track check-in and session attendance? What are the benefits? And then two, do you also track the busiest times and what are those benefits as well?
Yeah. So again, going back to that conference in Cape Town, we use the check-in feature in the Hoover platform, and it works splendidly. I mean, in the past, it would be hard to keep track in terms of how many people have checked in and when the busiest check-in time, if you may, right? So now we have information. Now we know within the first 2 hour registration open, 500 people have checked in, right? So now going forward, you can say, all right, well, I need to have more people for the first half day, the first day. So I think again, it just being able to have information about your customer, like what their behavior is like, when to Max's point, like do they like the afternoon session more, do they like the early evening session more, right? So that will all go about helping you plan and schedule your program accordingly. And on the logistics side and the staffing side, again, if you know that a lot of your attendees like to check in early in the morning, even though the conference doesn't start until later, you want to make sure that you have enough staffing there to support that. And again, the check-in feature, first time using it, so easy, so straightforward. But again, you get a lot of information from that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so wonderful to hear how these check-in features have been of such use to both of you and how this data in general can really help shape the way that you plan your events moving forward. So thank you. And then the next, I want to transition into talking more specifically about the role that event data can play when working with sponsors and exhibitors, as we know how important they are to running events. So firstly, I would like to ask, what types of event data do exhibitors and sponsors find the most valuable when deciding whether to participate in an event? So for example, do they ask to see a specific type of data from your past events before they make a decision? So Jimmy, I'll start with you. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think one thing I've learned is that you know number of people attend the conference is not as helpful as who attend the conference. So at the end of the day, if you have a conference of 500 people and those 500 people are you know, high level folks who are decision maker or decision influencer, that conference could be much more valuable to a prospective sponsor than a conference that attract 2,000 people, but many of them just don't have any decision making ability and so on. So obviously the quality of the data or the information is definitely more important, I think, to sponsor an exhibitor. And then for my conferences, certainly the type of attendee as well. So obviously company want to talk to people who are from industry, even though they come to learn from academics and researcher on the latest research in my case, kind of communication and networking technology. But they want to talk to people who want to buy their product or services, so definitely demographics, who the people are, and again where they're coming from, and what is their decision making authority and such. I think all of that information is helpful and important for the company that would decide whether they want to participate in a conference or not.
Absolutely. Those are great points. Thank you for sharing that. And then Max, back to you. What event data do you find to be the most valuable for sponsors and exhibitors?
Yeah, so I like what Jimmy said, that it's a big focus on who is coming to the conference, sometimes over the number of people. We also tend to work that way in our perspective and think about what did the people that have come to our conference come to get out of it, or what are they taking away from our conference when they leave that we can then prepare for the future. So our exhibitors want to know that, as well as Jimmy mentioned, just the demographics of being a sponsor, how they're going to have access to our attendees. And Whova actually has a lot of great features. I'm speaking more to our exhibitors who tend, for at least for our conference, to engage with Whova a bit more. But our exhibitors love using the direct contact features that allow for attendees to just interact with them very directly through the app, no matter where they are at our conference or time of day. They are also able to promote themselves using their own sponsor, or using their own deals and offers rather. So they get that kind of marketing appeal as well as exhibitors. And they've also asked in the past just how we've been able to push engagement with all of our exhibitors happening at once. Whova has also allowed us to implement a bit more gamification in terms of having things. We have an exhibitor dash where they must hit all the exhibitor tables in order to be entered for a prize or something like that. So they often, in addition to what Jimmy said, have asked us about how are they going to directly engage with our audience, and how are they going to be set up to engage with all parts of our audience, whether they are virtual or in person.
And
Absolutely.
Chelsea, if I may just kind of piggyback on Matt's point here. So I think speaking to the audience too, I think if you can, those are all the really cool tools within Whova that you can leverage for your sponsor and exhibitor. I tried it last year, and a couple people used it, but I would like to definitely see more, many more of the company utilizing those tools, especially the direct messaging feature. I mean that you bypass having to drop a business card into a fishbowl the old school way, So, but yeah, I highly encourage the folks on the webinar to look into those tools and encourage your sponsor and exhibitor to use those.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that on. It's great to hear how useful these features can be, not only to you as organizers, but in turn to your sponsors and exhibitors, to just improve the overall experience. So thank you both so much for sharing on that. And then just to follow up on this, I'll direct this next question to Max to ask that, in your experience, if you utilized any specific event data to secure more sponsors and exhibitors, and specifically how about leveraging attendee demographic data for those sponsors and exhibitors.
Yeah, of course. So I believe Jimmy started talking about this because his conferences also appeal internationally and globally. And although ours focuses on the Pacific Rim region, we are open as well globally for attendance. So kind of expanding on my prior answer as well, we're quite transparent. We're trying to be transparent with our sponsors and exhibitors when it comes to sharing that data to emphasize what they'll get out of our conference by becoming an exhibitor or a sponsor. And the main piece of data is just simply how our demographics are represented and what demographics are represented. I would say that many of our exhibitors are interested in the global reach that we have as an international conference. So they want to know which countries, which uh, uh, continents around the world are going to be represented so they can know if their company, if their organization and the work that they do is applicable and also appealing to that demographic that's going to be at our conference. As a disability studies focused conference also, they want to also know about our audience identity. So how they identify whether that is a family member of somebody with a disability, whether that is a caregiver, whether that is an educational professional, whether they themselves identify with a disability. And Hoover has a feature in which we allow them to register with those categories if they choose to disclose them so that we can make sure that we have sessions and we have other pieces of our conference dedicated to that demographic as they identify. But for exhibitors and sponsors, those are also really important topics because they want to come to our conference to hopefully and ideally also, aside from market, serve the community. And that allows them to educate how they intend to serve their community and how they intend to bring certain initiatives to our conference to share with those people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those insights, Max. Do you have anything you would like to add on to that as well, Jimmy?
Yeah, I also like to think you can use your data to show any changes or especially growth within your conference. If in like a 5-year time frame you see that you went from 500 people to 800 people, you definitely want to show that to your prospective sponsor and exhibitor. And you see, let's say, more, again, depending on the demographic and the interest for the conference, but you see more industry people, for example, attending your conference, you definitely want to highlight that. So again, it's important to know, obviously know your customer, and especially if you're seeing this positive trend, you definitely want to share that with prospective companies.
Yes, definitely. Thank you again for adding on to that question as well. And then just to elaborate a little bit more on this topic, what innovative ways can event technology be leveraged to provide sponsors with actionable insights and improve their ROI? So for example, some Hoover customers show the number of impressions on the app to sponsors to convince them to return for their next event. So Max, we can start with you this time. What do you think?
So one of the features that our exhibitors liked, especially with Hoover, although we didn't have everyone use it, we had some people use it, is there's the oh, sorry, what was it referred to as? The live exhibitor feature, live showcase feature it was. And that allowed them to create almost like their own virtual event that also made use of outreach campaigns to bring more attention to their presence at the conference. So one piece of data that we were able to share was simply how many people were interacting, how many people were directly engaging with them. In that sense, having that virtual component for them to interact, not just at the conference, but also prior, like during pre-conference events, during post-conference events, was really helpful because we had these documented pieces of interaction that we could cite for our exhibitors and sponsors to show them not only did this interaction happen, but here's the context of how it happened. Here's the context of the different engagements that did occur and the different outcomes that occurred because of those interactions. So that was really helpful in terms of giving them a very transparent look at exactly what they could do when they attend our conference as an exhibitor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Jimmy, the same question to you. How do you think event technology can be leveraged to provide sponsors with insights and greater ROI?
Yeah, I think Max have highlighted so many of those key feature, especially within the Hoover platform, that can really bring exhibitor and sponsor kind of closer to the attendee, right? But even as simple as getting the old day, you have retrieval machines and stuff like that. But these days, you can easily print the QR code on the badge, and then without having, again, keep thinking about money here on the plan aside, you know, without having to hire a company to provide a leadership machine. All you have to do is invite, you know, your sponsor and exhibitor to utilize the Hoover app and just scan that QR code and right then and there, they get so much information about the people who are visiting their booth, and then virtually, you know, as Max already mentioned, all the things that they can do with the attendees. So, but at the end of the day, like I said, the sponsor exhibitor just want to know who visited that, like who they're speaking to, and I think being able to share that information, share that data with them is pretty powerful.
Absolutely. No, that's so insightful to hear. Thank you both for elaborating more on that topic. And then in terms of communication, when you present data to your exhibitors or sponsors, is it better to do it in person or on a Zoom call or just through email? So Jimmy, we'll go back to you. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think as much as possible, you try to do it in face to face. You know, and unless it's, you know, a lot of data, you know, let's say you have 20 slides of data, then maybe you should just send out an email to your sponsor exhibitor. But if it's key metric that you want to share, especially things that, you know, have great value to a certain sponsor and exhibitor, you want to share that on a personal level, you know, again, whether it's through a Zoom call or an in-person meeting. So and I'm old school like that, so as much as possible, I prefer to share good news or bad news face to face.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then Max, I'll ask the same question to you.
I definitely agree with Jimmy that as much as possible, you want to have that face-to-face or at least that live interaction to marry the data that you're presenting to an intrinsic connection with that person, with that organization, so that there's also that passion that's integrated into the conversation. But um, having something virtual, having something documented via like a virtual interaction, as I mentioned in my prior question, is also valuable to just have something to go back to. Oftentimes our sponsors are being contacted by many different people. They have many different things that they're juggling. So to be able to cite back to our conversation and follow up with them in that way can be really helpful as well.
Absolutely. That's a great point. It's so interesting to hear both of your perspectives, kind of the consensus about being in person or virtually and having that interaction when you're presenting your data. So thank you both for sharing. So now we've covered sponsors and exhibitors extensively. I'd like to transition to ask about how you can apply insights from your event data to events content. So first, how do you use data to evaluate your event content, and what does the data help you find, and how does the data help you find ways to improve your event? And then second, more specifically, what analytics can you use to determine the most popular topics and speakers? And then how can this guide future event programming? So Max, I'll go back to you first for this question. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so I may be reiterating or expanding on some of my answers from prior, but data is probably the core of how we build to improve future events. And engagement, I would say, is the key word in terms of what data we are looking for and how we're trying to assess it for the next year. Specifically, as I mentioned, an example earlier was our engagement in more lecture-based content later in the day, causing us to move it up, as well as a focus on Indigenous studies, causing us to open up a topic that focuses on Indigenous studies. I think because we have so many different topics and different strands for our conference each year, engagement also just helps us determine, okay, did this new topic hit well or hit critically with our audience this year? If not, was that a cause of our topic and the opportunity to access it? Was it a cause of interest from our audience? And we can look at data pieces like specific feedback to sessions, those like features even, to determine if that did come from the audience, or even how our presenters used the components that they had to engage with our audience as well, to see if it was also on our presenters end. So did they use that Q&A feature? did they use the different marketing features via Hoover to promote their session more? Maybe that's part of why they have more engagement for that session. So it allows us to also give recommendations to our speakers as we move forward to say, hey, this really worked to push engagement and attention towards this session last year. We recommend using it as a platform to reach our audience throughout the conference, whether they're there in person with you or not.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And then Jimmy, same question. How have you used data to evaluate your content?
Yeah. So, many of my conferences are very technical, academic type conferences. So, I guess for those who are on the call, if you've done those, you're familiar that the core of the program, the key content is driven by how many submissions you get from your membership. And of course, being that we're talking about technology and engineering here, that change almost on a daily basis. And so even though from year to year, there are these tracks that we ask our member to submit to, but along the way, if you start seeing, from one year to the next, you may get like 30 submission one year, and suddenly you get 5 submissions the next year. You probably want to know what the cost for that, and probably because that topic is not interesting anymore. And so understanding that, you probably want to make some adjustment to the program, whether sunsetting that particular track or combining that track with another one, so that you're not going to have, again, a room with 5 speakers and like 2 people in the room. So it's important to be able to collect that information from year to year, and understanding what topic is really driving your conference, and making sure that you keep adding adding topic that are pertinent to your audience, and then also looking at topic that may not be of great interest anymore from your audience.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those insights as well. And then along with this, we know that marketing also plays a huge important role in the planning process for an event. So to touch a little bit on that topic, wanted to ask, how can demographic and geographic data from previous events help in targeting untapped attendee segments for future events? So Jimmy, we'll go back to you for this. What do you think?
Yeah, this is really important. So as I mentioned, like my programs goes all over the place. So obviously, if the conference is going to be in Taiwan, for example, I mean, yes, as much as we send our e-blast to the 50,000 member in our database, the click rate might not be really high. So maybe you do that every now and then, but you want to be more targeted toward the audience in Asia Pacific, and maybe even Australia, for example, because those are the people you want to come to the conference, right? And obviously, if the conference is in Europe, then you want to be targeted with that too. So again, this is why you need to know where your audience is coming from, and make sure that you be more focused on what they're looking for. So
Yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And then Max, same question. What is your take on this?
When I think of this question for my conference specifically, I think towards more accessibility, because our demographics and the things that I can think of in terms of direct changes we've made have been, for example, an increase in our American Sign Language interpreters, because there was simply a need for that. And that's what we gathered from feedback, as well as the data that represented the people that would use those services. We've also had to be very conscious of where we have lodging, in terms of lodging travel to the venue and back, for those same reasons, making sure those also are accessible pathways for them to come to our conference and leave as they go. But in general, I would also say that previous data allows for us to model and give an example, or just a simple showcase to others that we haven't engaged or reached out to say, here, these are the people that are going to come. This is how we've also expanded. I'm sure Jimmy can also feel the same in the sense that it's not just a copy paste effort each year, even if it's the same conference, it's always completely different. And so we can also show them via data, not just 1 year's worth of what happened, but this consistent progression of how things are going and the trends that are happening so that we can also show them what appeals to them.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It's so interesting on hearing the different ways that data can help you expand your audience and be more accommodating to expand that. So thank you. And in regards to finding useful methods for reaching attendees, have you experienced with data-driven timing for announcements or for ticket launches? And what unexpected successes or failures did you encounter? So Max, we'll go back to you. What is your experience with this?
Yes, so it has been a little tricky, honestly, with announcements because timing is such an integral part of that. And with a global demographic, everyone is accessing their emails or their social media or our marketing campaigns at different times of the day and sometimes even on different days. However, because we have data we can from all of our attendees globally, we can kind of center on an average timing, on an average best practices for our marketing, for our announcements. And even during the conference, I'd say that we're able to assess what announcements are hitting directly. So if we're sending this out at this point, are people actually engaging with it versus if we wait until lunch to send this out, are people going to be more engaged on their phones, actually having time outside of sessions to interact with each other and focus more on networking? So yeah, that would be my answer.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's very interesting. And then Jimmy, same question. What is your experience?
Yeah, like I mean, like, as the old saying go, right? Timing's everything. So you know, the majority of the member for IEEE ComSoc are academic, and you would think that being PhD student, professor and such, deadlines and things like that are very important to them. But sadly, that's not the case. So oftentimes, we're constantly sending reminders, especially as deadlines are coming up. So if you know that the deadline a week from now, that's when you start bombarding them with email or social media posts and so on. Just remind them. If you send the same announcement even a month in advance, they're not going to pay attention to it. So again, that goes back to even what Max is saying. It's like you know your audience, you have the data, you know that 2 days before the deadline, your submission jumps up 80%. That's when you want to go about attacking that timeline. And likewise registration, same thing. You have a registration deadline, and then you just got constantly send a reminder as the deadline get closer. But yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great to hear the different ways that you've both used data for your different marketing purposes. But now I'd like to shift to post-event because I also want to discuss how data can be collected to analyze your event once it's ended. So what data do you prioritize gathering after the event, and how do you leverage it to improve your future events? And then can you think of a specific instance where your post-event data insights were able to shape the next one? So Jimmy, go back to you for this. What are your thoughts?
Um, so my post-conference survey tend to try to understand more the experience of the audience and not so much which session they go to. Because we have that, right? We can easily capture that, whether it's through headcount or using the Hoover app and such. But I like to know, how their check-in process was. Let's say the check-in process that I just described earlier, was it much better than waiting in line and not knowing what line to get on and to pick up your badge? So I want to know about that. I want to know about, when they go to a reception, with there plenty of food, with getting to the food easy, So it's more quantitative in that sense rather than I'm talking more qualitative in that sense rather than quantitative. But again, I know everybody do their post conference evaluation differently. But for me, I tend to focus more on the kind of the experience of the attendee and not so much which session they went to and what they like and don't like. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And then Max, same question. What data do you prioritize after your events?
Yeah, we also have our post survey, although I like what Jimmy said about a lot of the feedback that we actually have tried to implement fixes to have been more logistical in the planning aspect and the procedural aspect of the conference, excuse me. So one example I can think of was that we had feedback in prior years where we had more of an open style lunch where people were able to get lunch, but then still walk around our venue and walk around the conference and kind of go in and out of our poster sessions and more passive conference events. This year, we're actually, due to the feedback from last year in our post survey, are going to have more of a set networking space to eat meals in so that people have a one place to gather in order to emphasize that networking aspect. And that's something that we wouldn't have done if not for the feedback through our post surveys. So often, besides even just the raw data aspect, it really is just those verbal language feedbacks that we get from our attendees that also help inform our next steps.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. It's very fascinating to hear how those insights from data can be applied to better your future events as well. It does look like we're closing in on the hour here, so that's going to wrap up our panel discussion. I want to thank both of our speakers greatly for answering our questions for us. And then following our schedule, we will start the live Q&A portion next. Firstly, how do you encourage use of the app for the in-person portion of the event to get accurate data? I find that most in-person attendees don't use things like connecting with other attendees or sponsors or asking questions through the app, and it can cause adjusted results in the reporting.
I can speak to that first. I think we really try to provide incentive as well, as kind of our bottom line in terms of engagement and interaction with Whova. And we really try to emphasize the focus on Whova, not just to try and push everybody into that space, but also to emphasize the features that they would be missing out on if they were not in the Whova app interacting with us as they have those opportunities to. For example, we don't necessarily have a printed program anymore for our conference. We really try to emphasize this virtual aspect of our program. And of course, we have alternative formats available should they be needed. But we will say to our demographic, well, if you want the specifics, if you want full details of every single presentation updated by the speakers themselves and a way to ask them questions if you have them, the best way to do that is through Whova. And also there are simply announcements that they will miss if not in the Whova app, getting those very timed and scheduled announcements day to day. We also implement, like I said earlier, gamification aspects. So we'll say, in Whova, we're going to announce our winner for this gamification initiative, for this exhibitor initiative. And so there's just a lot of incentives for them. And even for our presenters, we'll use Whova and say, hey, make sure you log into the Whova event. Make sure you check where your presentation time slot is, as well as the spellings, as well as your titles. And please let us know if you need to adjust anything so that there's a direct reason for everyone to interact.
Absolutely. Jimmy, would you like to add on to that as well? Oh, you're still muted, by the way. Sorry.
I think one of the great thing about Whova is that it extend the time of the conference, right? Because obviously for people who are attending the conference, you don't want them to be on the app, you want them to be networking with people there face to face. But to Max's point, after the conference, they oh yeah, I should have asked that guy the question. They can still do that through the Whova platform. And I believe it's for like another 30 days or something after the conference that you can still interact with the other attendee or presenters and so on. So I think that's a great benefit of using something like Whova. And I think we do highlight that to our in-person attendees is that, even though the conference may have ended, even though you flew back home, but just so you can still access all the resources through the Whova platform.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. There was a question earlier asking how to add additional data collection at registration. Jimmy mentioned collecting data about how many attendees picked up a bag or attended lunch. Is that something you collect through Whova? So we did have someone respond to that, but if either of you would like to add anything as well.
So this question is asking about data in terms of like registration and check-in.
Asking if you're able to collect through Whova, if that is something that you collect through Whova. Collecting data about attendees picked up a bag lunch or attended lunch.
Oh,
yeah. Well, so I can talk on that real quick. So I feel bad mentioning this, but our attendee tend to be a little bit cavalier, if you may, right? So oftentimes in the past, they would pick up the conference gift, and especially with something really nice. Sometimes they'll come back and say, "Oh, I didn't pick up my gift. Can I have the second one?" Right? So, all right. But what are you gonna say? You have no record that he or she would have pick up the gift. But if you scan their badge and pick up the bag, right? Next time they come back and you scan the badge again, they'll say, "Oh, sorry, Jimmy Lee, you already picked up your bag." So that's one way of kind of controlling your gift distribution. And I know I feel bad saying this, but again, if you're giving out like a $50 backpack to your confident attendee, obviously you don't want to give out to one person.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for elaborating a little bit more on that. Do you have anything to add, Max?
No, I that triggered my own thought of that same situation. We sometime last year in a prior year, we did lunch vouchers for lunch so that they could get whatever they wanted from the kiosks. And of course, tracking that was very difficult because maybe they'd come and they say, "Oh, I lost my $20 voucher," and we didn't have necessarily a way to track, "Oh, we already gave you one or not." So being able to notice that and then implement means of control moving forward, such as scanning their badge, such as even including that in their badge in like a QR code version of the voucher even, has been a great way to address those fixes.
Absolutely. Thank you for elaborating more on that as well. It looks like that's all the questions that we have as of now, but I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today as our guest speakers. We really appreciate you both sharing all of your insights with us. I know I got some great takeaways from this, and I'm sure that our audience did as well. So to our audience, I want to thank you all for being here today with us, and to those who answered the poll and asked questions, thank you. It was a pleasure hosting this session, and I hope you all had a great time learning from our guest speakers. And then before we log off, I just want to give a quick reminder that the recording of today's session will be available on Whova's YouTube channel coming up shortly, so you will receive an announcement once that's available. And then in the meantime, you can also check out past sessions and other content on Whova's YouTube channel. But other than that, thank you all once again for enjoying our session. Thank you again, Jimmy and Max. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.